For more on his debut on the radio with Brian Wheeler, we are now joined by Casey Holdahl. And Casey, what's it been like being with Wheels, getting a chance to work a couple of games now from the radio perspective?
It's been a lot of fun, actually. A lot more fun than I assumed it would be. I went into it, and I was a little nervous about it just because I wanted to make sure that I was prepared and I wasn't stepping on Brian's toes. And obviously, Brian's such a great broadcaster that it's not like sitting down next to someone who's just started in the business. So, but it was, like I said, it was a lot of fun. It's great to hear Wheels call a game. Obviously, I go to every game, so typically I don't get to hear the radio broadcast as much, though in my preparation, I had listened to quite a few of Wheels' calls just to kind of get a sense of his rhythm and kind of how he calls a game. So it was great. I got a lot of good feedback from people. Hopefully I didn't ruin too many of our broadcasts, and hopefully people enjoyed it a bit. I was hoping that we were able to get the game last night so I could have finished off on a perfect run, but obviously, as everyone knows, Trailblazers coming up just a bit short last night versus the Warriors. So all in all, I'd say it was a fun experience. I'm going to do a few more games here in a couple weeks or so. But yeah, no, good time, and always nice to actually get done with a game and then do some interviews and then actually go home rather than spending the next 2+ hours writing. So that was a bonus as well.
Well, I heard nothing but great things about your debut with Wheels over the last couple of games. And as we asked Lamar, the first time you try something different, you always learn something you probably didn't anticipate. What was it about radio, your experience with Wheels, that was something you probably didn't anticipate going into it?
Well, I mean, it just viewing the game or covering the game from that perspective, it does move a lot quicker than I guess you realize when you're covering it more from a written perspective. So typically during a game, I'm taking notes and I'm on Twitter and kind of talking about what's happening in the game. And in some respects, I thought I would be able to still do that on the radio. Not the case. I try to do some updates here and there on Twitter. You miss things almost right off the bat when you start trying to do that. I take some notes, but definitely not as thorough as I typically would if I was going to be recapping the game, because you really want to make note of runs and things that happen away from the ball as well, so you can ask about that after the game. A little bit more difficult to do that doing radio, and to kind of give you an impression of how maybe naive I was about this. I kind of thought that I would join Wheels on the call, and then I would go and write recaps after the game, or I would go write another story after the game. And I got about 10 minutes into the first game when I realized that definitely wasn't going to be able to happen. So it takes a lot more active viewing than, which kind of sounds, again, foolish or maybe a little naive, because you cover game. I've been covering games for the Blazers for almost 10 years now, so you kind of assume that it becomes old hat. But once you change mediums, whether it's television, radio, or written, it really changes the entire structure of what you're doing. So something you can do in one medium is definitely not necessarily something you can do in another.
And you were mentioning your responsibilities after the game. We oftentimes talk in this line of work. It can be exhausting sometimes because it takes a lot of energy to be up and on when you're doing a radio or television broadcast. Did you feel any different physically afterwards? Did you have any fatigue after?
Right after the game gets over, I was a little tired, but it's actually, for me, it's been the opposite. Like, I typically, I'm sure you guys know, because I'm sure you probably faced it as well. You go home and at least for me, I have a hard time going to bed after games anyways, and that's even 2-3 hours after the game is over, because when I'm writing, you need to have an active mind, and you really kind of have to be sharp, and when you're asking questions, you have to be present and understand the situation and ask smart questions. So typically when I get home, it takes a while to unwind. I found that doing it on the radio broadcast, it's 10 times worse. I haven't had a good night's sleep since I've called this stretch of game with Wheels, because I get home and one, I go back and I listen to the call and kind of figure out what I probably could have done better. Part of it is that again, you have to be more active and more kind of live when you're doing that than you do when you're writing, because it's just you don't have to have an affect necessarily when you're writing a story, or if you don't have an affect, but on the radio, you have to kind of bring that energy to it. So, I've found that while it's a little more tiring, like right after the game gets over, in the preceding hours after that, it's much more difficult. So, but it's good though. It's a fun kind of nervous energy, and I've been enjoying it.
You want to see your sleeping patterns really change, start coaching.
Oh, God. I can't even imagine. That's one of the things, too, that you would assume people would understand it, but kind of the feedback you get from people a lot of times leads you to believe that they don't, is that how difficult coaching is and how much time it takes, and that just the amount of dedication that goes into it. I mean, we travel with the team, and those guys, everyone gets on the plane and, maybe has something to eat or reads a book or watches a movie or watches a television show. Those guys go straight into film and do it for the entire trip. And I can only and then they get to the hotel and they continue to do the same thing. So you're exactly right, Michael. Whatever it is that I'm doing and however much energy I'm expending is a pittance compared to what the guys that are coaching the game are doing.
Casey, let me ask you about any changes in your preparation, going from written as a medium of recapping a game to being on air and being verbal. Is your preparation any different? Have you found yourself thinking now about what you want to say, or cliches or sayings? Because I know Wills is so good at what he does that when it is your time to jump in, you got to be pretty precise and concise.
Absolutely. And I mean, knowing what to say is part of it. Knowing when to jump in with Wheels is a difficult part as well. But as far as my preparation goes, it is quite a bit different because typically when I'm writing a story, I'm writing it from the perspective of, or not so much the perspective, but with in mind that the most likely a Trailblazer fan is going to be reading this. So I, pretty much try to keep it pretty Trailblazer focused. When you're calling a game, you really have to talk more about the other team than you do typically, or at least for me, when I'm writing a story. So a lot of that preparation is really digging into what the other team has been doing over the last 3, 4, 5 games. I've watched way more film before games in preparation for a radio call than I would for a written story. And then a lot of statistical analysis, too, and trying to find bits and pieces. Wheels has most of that stuff on lockdown, but I know there are a few places I can go where I can get stats for player tracking or for play types that, just kind of might be interesting, might not be something that Wheels necessarily going to bring up because he's got basically 95% of that stuff covered anyways. So the preparation for me has been a whole lot different. And it's been fun, too. Again, just kind of the work of figuring out what works and what doesn't. Like, I don't try to come up with any kind of clever sayings to think of when I'm doing my preparation. I leave that to Wheels. He's a pro. He's great at it. He's been doing it for years. I'm there to just add a little bit of information and a little bit of excitement and a little more kind of player-focused discussion rather than I do obviously talk about what's going on the floor, but having spent so much time with the team over the years, just little vignettes here and there about stuff that happens in the locker room or something the guy said pregame and so on and so forth. So, a lot of it is just kind of being more of an active participant in the game when you're calling it on radio than you would typically when you're going to write a recap or a feature after the game.
Well, Casey, I've been on the air with you a few times here on the show, and you've got very good verbal skills. So you don't have any Holdahl-isms yet for the radio?
I don't actually, and I haven't really thought about it. And again, I don't, that's. Wheels has so many good calls, and it's like I'm not going to step into that booth with Wheels in game 2 of calling and say something that's interesting or clever or funny or anything like that. So I'm of the opinion that you got to kind of I'm the guy who dips his toe in the water and then stands on the shore for 5 or 6 minutes before he decides to jump in. So that's kind of the same approach I'm taking to this. I don't want it to be over the top. I don't want it to take away from anything that Wheels is doing. I just want to be a good compliment to his call, which is fantastic.
Casey,
I feel like that's more about just being mellow.
That's very smart. You got to cut your teeth before you chew steak.
Absolutely.
That would be a Holtonism, by the way, if you want to talk about what one of those looks like.
If there's any opportunity to talk about guys' teeth and eating meats, I'll use that, Mike.
And Casey, you mentioned you've been doing this the last couple of games, and for the Blazers, they've won 3 out of their last 4. We've seen a different starting lineup. What have been your observations about this team now that you've sort of had a different perspective to look at these games?
Absolutely. I think they've been obviously much better defensively, as I'm sure you guys have talked about. Defensive efficiency in the month of January has skyrocketed for the Blazers. I think they're the 9th most efficient defense in January. And in this little stretch here, since Evan Turner and Noah Vonleh entered the starting lineup, even better. Terry even talked about that a little bit, where we're so used to the offense coming free and easy and the defense being such a trial that, over these last 2-3 weeks, it's actually really been the offense that's struggled a bit. I think, the corresponding improvement in defense kind of led to a fall off in the offense. I think they were something about 22nd or 23rd in offensive efficiency. So, kind of seeing those even out a little bit in these last couple games, I think it's been good to see. I think Evan Turner has really been making some strides, and I think we're really starting to see kind of what they were hoping to get out of Evan Turner when they signed him as a free agent this offseason. And I think that particularly for Al Farouk, because obviously Mo hasn't played a whole lot. He just returned to the lineup last night. Chief, I think, has been fantastic in that second lineup. I think that, from both a defensive perspective where he's always great, and he just seems like he's a little more aggressive on offense, and not even so much from an issue of kind of forcing the action, which, I mean, he has done a little bit more in that second group, which makes sense because he's not out there with the same caliber of players. But it just seems like he's a little more, I don't know, like distilled, I guess is how I would put it, even though that's not probably the best way to put it. But, it just seems like you're getting the best out of Al Farouk right now in that secondary lineup. And Noah Vonleh bringing a bit of energy early in the game. I think all that together has kind of helped the Blazers kind of get off that snide a little bit and improve. And, there was obviously losing the game last night. You'd much rather win it, and there was talk about, it's just a moral victory. And I don't think it was, but I do think that it was a continuation of an improved brand of basketball the Blazers have been playing, I'd say, over the last, going on 2 weeks now, which is what I've been waiting to see. That I've been reluctant to say the team is kind of turning a corner or making strides, because it seems like every time I do say something like that, they end up backsliding. So it's been nice to see it for an extended period of time, and I think that they can finish out this homestand, get a few more victories, and before they head out on the road for a quick trip, I think you start to feel like maybe something is building as you go into this All-Star break.
Casey, we just had Lamar Hurd on before you, and he had his first experience skiing today, and we were just sitting here wondering, since you're coming on right after him, are you a skier? Have you ever skied?
I've done a little bit of skiing and a little bit of snowboarding. I pretty much gave that stuff up after I tore out my ACL playing kickball about 7 or 8 years ago. So basically, I stick to snowshoeing now, which I find to be quite fun and relaxing. Kind of all the nice parts of being out in nature and, the beautiful scenery and being with friends and kind of being cold and then going and being warm somewhere without the velocity or the opportunity for serious injuries. So my snow sports days, I think, are pretty much behind me, but I do still enjoy a trip to the mountain every now and then.
Well, thank you so much for taking some time to join us. That is rookie radio broadcaster Casey Holdahl and seasoned snowshoer as well, too.